Now, unlike President Biden, I don't dismiss Americans' fear about higher prices. I share them. And I share their conviction that we must change course before it's too late. That is why I'm here. Today, I speak to you not just as Speaker of the House, but as a father, as a former small business owner, as a taxpayer, as a proud American. I want to talk to you about the debate that is not happening in Washington, but should be happening over our national debt. It's a debate that directly affects the lives of every single American. America deserves to hear the truth. So I'm going to start just with the facts. Our national debt is too high, far too high. And the problem is getting worse, not better. We are now $31 trillion in debt. That's more than the entire economy of America, 20% more. Think for a moment. That is unsustainable. Over the next 10 years, the United States will pay $10.5 trillion just in interest on our debt. Put that in perspective. Since 1940 until today, we have paid $9 trillion of interest in our total debt. Over 83 years, $9 trillion. And now we're going to pay 10.5 and 10. If our lifetimes, these interest payments are on track to crowd out and eventually eclipse the vital programs like Social Security and Medicare. And let me repeat, far from protecting these vital programs, as the president says he will, President Biden's extreme spending threatens to crush them with debt and economic decay. Without exaggeration, American debt is a ticking time bomb that will detonate unless we take serious, responsible action. Yet, how has President Biden reacted to this issue? He has done nothing. So in my view, I think in the rest of America, that's irresponsible. Rather than face the facts, this president has embraced a fantasy that debt doesn't matter, that money can always be created out of thin air, and that the solution to higher prices caused by reckless spending is just higher taxes. In 2 short years, President Biden, along with the Democrats in Congress, have added $6 trillion to our national debt burden, which created inflation, made us more dependent on China, and has undermined Medicare and Social Security. Today, it's the American people who are left paying the price. Americans have received a pay cut for 24 consecutive months. The longest streak in American history as inflation has just persisted. In fact, since President Biden took office, families have lost the equivalent of $7,400 worth of income. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make ends meet. For young families, Biden's inflation means home ownership is moving further and further away. For our seniors, Biden's inflation means a lifetime of retirement savings are being ravaged. And now we see the collapse of the largest bank since the Great Recession. It's a direct result of incompetent bank supervision and the negative effects of constantly fighting President Biden's inflation. It is basic economics that when Washington prints more and more money, prices go up and purchasing power comes down. As my favorite economist, Milton Friedman, said it more than 50 years ago, inflation is made in Washington. Yet rather than working with Republicans to find a reasonable agreement to tame inflation, provide certainty to the economy, President Biden is demanding that Congress make room for new debt without a single sensible change to how government spends your hard-earned money. Not one change. My question to you today, does that sound responsible? Let me put it this way. If you gave your child a credit card and they kept maxing it out to the limit, would you just blindly raise the limit? Of course not. Not one parent would do that. You'd be responsible for paying the bill, but you would sit down. You'd work with them to figure out how they could change their spending habits so it never happens again. That exact same thing is true for our national debt. Debt limit negotiations are an opportunity to examine our nation's finances. Now, in the past 35 years, there has been 8 major deficit reduction laws enacted by Congress. Every single one of them was attached to legislation that raised the debt limit, and every one of them was bipartisan. Why? Because the problem gets solved only when both parties come together. Now, when he was Senator Joe Biden, he voted for spending reforms attached to debt limit increases 4 times. In 1985, in 1987, in 1993, and in 1997. And on those other occasions, when he opposed raising the debt limit, it was because he said the deficit reduction measures were not enough to justify debt limit increases. To quote Senator Biden, his opposition to raising the debt limit in 2004 was a protest of the policies that have brought us to this point and a demand that we change course. What changed, Joe? As Vice President, Biden led the talks on spending restraints in 2011 debt negotiations. During those negotiations, which we actually called the Biden Group, he passionately made the case for negotiating in good faith. To again quote then Vice President Biden, he said, "You can't govern without negotiating." What changed, Mr. President? I agree with the former sensible Joe Biden. He knew that our government is designed to find compromise. I just wish the current extreme Joe Biden would listen to the former Joe Biden too. I met with President Biden at the White House on February 1st, 75 days ago. During our meeting, I told the president clearly, let's find a way to come to an agreement, like we have before. Had the president agreed to negotiate in good faith, we'd already be done. Unfortunately, I have not heard from the White House since our very first meeting. President Biden has been missing in action and misleading the public. Mr. President, with all due respect, enough is enough. This is not how the leader of the free world should act. Your partisan political games are provoking the very crisis you claim to avoid. Greater dependency on China, increasing inflation, and threatening Medicare and Social Security. Even members of his own party think this approach is extreme. Democrat Senator Joe Manchin recently said, "Recent actions make clear to me that the Biden administration is determined to pursue ideological agenda." Senator Manchin is right. Make no mistake, the longer President Biden waits to be sensible, to find an agreement, the more likely it becomes that this administration will bumble into the first default in our nation's history. Addressing the debt requires us to come together, find common ground, and reduce spending. Let me be clear, defaulting on our debt is not an option. But neither is a future of higher taxes, higher interest rates, more dependency on China, an economy that doesn't work for working Americans. Let me be clear. A no strings attached debt limit increase will not pass. But since the president continues to hide, House Republicans will take action. Okay, so here's our plan. In the coming weeks, the House will vote on a bill to lift the debt ceiling into the next year. Save taxpayers trillions of dollars, make us less dependent upon China, curb our high inflation, all without touching Social Security and Medicare. Simply put, it puts it on a fiscal responsible path in three ways. It limits, it saves, and it grows. First, we'll limit federal spending. You know, in the past 2 years, discretionary spending in Washington has exploded by more than 17%. That's faster than GDP growth or even inflation. And keep in mind, the new spending does not include the trillions of dollars of COVID-era spending. From 2011 to 2021, the federal government operated under spending caps. Though these caps were occasionally raised through debt limit negotiations, they were largely successful. Discretionary spending flatlined and overall spending growth slowed dramatically. Our legislation accomplishes the same goal by returning the federal government to 2022 levels. And then limit the growth of spending over the next 10 years to 1% of annual growth. Now, don't believe anyone who tells you these are draconian limits. Think about it. They're the same spending levels we had just 4 months ago. Just last October. Well, that's 7 months. And make sure that our veterans and our service members are taken care of. But the bloated, overgrown bureaucracy that has expanded under President Biden needs to be pruned. And that's exactly what we'll do. If Washington wants to spend more, it'll have to come together to find savings elsewhere. Just like every single American household does every single day. This will restore discipline to Washington, the budgeting, and to help put an end to reckless spending cause inflation. Now, second, we will save the taxpayer money. You know, in the unserious proposal, the budget the president made, he wants to spend more this year than government did during the height of the pandemic. Just think about that for one moment. He wants to spend more than we spent during the height of the pandemic. House Republicans actually believe the opposite should happen. Before we borrow another dime, we owe it to our children to save money everywhere. Our proposal will examine wasteful Washington spending and executive overreach in all forms. Among other items, it will claw back tens of billions of dollars in COVID-related money. You see, House Republicans have already passed a bill to end the pandemic, officially. And the president just signed it last week. So now it's time for Washington to return to normal. The American people are tired of politicians who use COVID as an excuse for more extreme inflationary spending. If the money was authorized to fight the pandemic, but was not spent during the pandemic, it should not be spent after the pandemic is over. Now, third, we will grow the economy so we stop being dependent on China. House Republicans already passed H.R. 1, the Lower the Energy Cost Act, and it had bipartisan support. Among other things, this bill restores American energy leadership, makes it easier to build things in America, and makes us less dependent upon China. And it brings jobs back to America. That will grow the economy. Our proposal will also restore work requirements that ensure able-bodied adults without dependents earn a paycheck and learn new skills. That will grow our economy and help the supply chain. Right now, there are more job openings than people who are looking for jobs. You know why? It's in part because the Biden administration weakened work requirements. Incentives matter. And the incentives today are out of whack. It's time to get Americans back to work. Don't believe anyone who says our plans hurt Americans' social safety net. We're a very generous nation. And when people fall on tough times, we'll help them. That will not change. But this is important. Assistance programs are supposed to be temporary, not permanent. A hand up, not a handout. A bridge to independence, not a barrier. Just as Ronald Reagan understood the importance of economic growth, we should welcome and celebrate the benefits of strong, growing economy. For with a strong, growing economy, we will no longer be dependent upon China. We will no longer be victims to inflation. And we can protect and preserve Social Security and Medicare. My fellow Americans, as we confront the consequences of President Biden's extreme, reckless spending, congressional Republicans are ready to act and to lead. That is the resolve to the House Republican majority, every single one of them. It's an honor to be in New York. I love this time of year. It's the beginning of baseball season. We all know what one of the most famous Yankees, the great Bambino, Babe Ruth. You know what he said? You just can't beat the person who never gives up. Well, if there's one thing I hope America has learned about me in the last 100 days in my race to become Speaker, I will never give up. I'll never give up on you. We will never give up on you. We will not rest until the economy is healthier, until our country is more confident, until our children's future is brighter. We owe it to the American people to use this moment in history to deliver the future they want, they need, and they deserve. I have full confidence that if we limit our federal spending, if we save the taxpayer money, if we grow our economy, yes, we will end the dependence on China. We will curb inflation, and we will protect Social Security and Medicare for the next generation. And America will be stronger for it. If you agree, don't sit back, join us. Joining us in demanding a reasonable negotiation, a responsible debt ceiling, an agreement that brings spending under control. And if President Biden decides to stop the partisan ways and stands with us, then a majority of us will join with him in common cause to address this urgent challenge. You've been patient. You've been kind. You've listened to me tell you a story about what's not happening in Washington. It's no longer the time to be quiet. It's no longer the time to be patient. Your job is you focus on markets every day. You know tomorrow will be better than today. But you also know businesses fail when their fiscal house is not in order. As citizens, you know our government does not have their fiscal house in order. It doesn't matter what political stripe you stand or what part of the country you grew up in. You love this country, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that we're all equal. You want your children to have a better future. You make sacrifices every day for them. But you know one of the greatness of this country is our ability, the design of our government, that both sides come together. For 75 days, the president has ignored the debt ceiling. As Speaker of the House, I have a responsibility to tell the nation that that has got to stop. This isn't something to be played with. This isn't something to put a political game with. I'm not predetermining what has to happen. But just as Reagan talked about a malaise of burdensome regulation, of inflation, of government trying to run the economy but ruining it, that is what we experience today. I'm here to tell you, I want a responsible, sensible debt ceiling. It puts us on an economic path to make America stronger. It works for every American. But that cannot happen if the president continues to ignore the problem. And he can't continue any longer. The day is coming. I do not want to see this president bumble in to a default. I want to sit down and solve the problem together. Thank you for the opportunity, and God bless America.